We're pleased to have been joined by the distinguished representative from the great state of Virginia, Representative Bobby Scott, and I now yield time to him.
Thank you, and I thank the gentleman from New York and the gentleman from Nevada for organizing the special order, and for the gentlelady from Ohio for her leadership in the Black Caucus and the other members who are participating tonight. Mr. Speaker, our economy has been improving very slowly over the last few years, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that we create as many jobs as possible. On Thursday, the United States faces a crisis, and that is whether we will pay our debts or whether we will, for the first time in our history, default on our debts. Now, the debate on the debt ceiling really isn't much of a debate, because every credible economist has already concluded that failure to adjust the debt ceiling will cause serious adverse consequences to the domestic economy, even the global economy. That conclusion really ought to end the debate. For those who want a little more information, you only have to look back a couple of years where the Republicans made a credible threat on the debt ceiling, and the S&P, just based on the credible threat, although we raised it in time, the S&P downgraded the credit worthiness of the United States for the first time in history. So we really don't know exactly what would happen. We know none of it's going to be good, but we'd be looking at possible increases in interest rates, lost jobs, stock market collapse and people's pensions at stake, government checks going out like Social Security and veterans benefits, doctors not being paid on Medicare, all adverse consequences for failing to adjust the debt ceiling. Now, Republican colleagues have threatened to use this crisis as an opportunity to gain legislative advantage to pass legislation that they can't pass through the normal process. Now, unfortunately for them, The Nation magazine published their wish list. It starts, of course, with undermining Obamacare, but then it goes on to, quote, entitlement reform, better known as cutting Social Security and Medicare, Keystone Pipeline, corporate tax cuts, sabotage EPA clean air regulations, offshore drilling. It goes on and on. They published the list. But the full faith and credit of the United States should not be a bargaining chip held hostage unless some legislative ransom is paid. Suppose the Democrats played the same game and put on the table immigration reform or gay rights, a jobs bill, or gun safety, and we're going to shut down the government or mess with the debt ceiling our way on that legislation. How dysfunctional a government would we have then? Now, in the past, there have been debt ceiling, and people have referred to the fact that in the past there have been negotiations over the debt ceiling, but those were different negotiations. Those were negotiations on the debt ceiling in the context of course, we're going to adjust the debt ceiling. And then you put things on the bill, so if you can get your little amendment on the bill, you know you're in good shape because that bill's going to pass. You'll get over the line. It has never been in the context of I don't get my way, we'll explode the economy, until 2 years ago when the Republicans pulled the stunt and the S&P downgraded our credit rating. About 45 times since the 1980s, we've increased the debt ceiling. It's always been in the context of course, the debt ceiling will be increased. Now, this isn't like a credit card where you increase your credit limit so that you can spend more. We've already spent it. We have passed the spending bills. We've already spent the money. The question is whether we're going to pay the bills. And if you're going to discuss fiscal responsibility, it ought to be at the time when you're deciding whether to spend the money, not after you spend it, whether you're going to pay the bills that you've already incurred. Now, we're discussing this debt ceiling while the government is shut down. And shut down for what reason? It started off on Obamacare. Now, many Republican senators have already said that that wasn't going to happen and it wasn't a good idea to shut down the government over Obamacare. Now that apparently they've pretty much given up on that, and some have said, well, we've shut down the government, we got to get something. The problem with giving something for shutting down the government is that there's a fairly fundamental concept in psychology. If you positive reinforcement, if you reward somebody for doing it, they'll probably do it again. they get a reward for shutting down the government, this will become part and parcel of the legislative process that if you can't get a bill passed, you'll shut down the government till you get it passed. Now, several Republican legislators have praised the fact that we've passed some little piecemeal bills to reopen government one little agency at a time. It looks to me like every morning they read the newspaper and find out the latest disaster caused by their shutdown, and then some things like servicemen not getting death benefits, the World War II memorial, cancer patients are not being treated at the National Institute of Health, Head Start. Every morning they read the tragic effects of their shutdown and then run to the House to address the disaster of the day and try to get some 30-second soundbite to cover up the fact that all they're doing is cleaning up part of the mess that they already caused. Now, passage of these little piecemeal bills only serves to elongate the shutdown. We need to reopen government, put an end to all this, and while some of us are working hard to produce jobs, this shutdown is costing hundreds of thousands of jobs. Now, finally, Mr. Speaker, the Republicans have criticized Democrats for not negotiating. Just want to remind everybody we're talking about the budget. The Democrats started with one number, the Republicans with another number. The Democrats didn't come halfway or two-thirds of the way. They just agreed to the Republican number on a short-term basis so we can continue to negotiate without shutting down the government. So we need to reopen all of the government, stop losing jobs, let's pay our debts, and then we can get to the real serious negotiations on the budget. I thank the gentleman for yielding and look forward to reopening government, paying our bills, and then getting into the tough negotiations.
I thank